Welcome into Candlestick Chronicles, a 49ers podcast on the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Kyle Madson. I write about the 49ers over at NinersWire.com. He is not JJ. He's Chris Biderman. And we're going to talk about Jauan Jennings' contract extension that's going to keep him with the 49ers through 2025 and what that means for him, what it means for the 49ers receiver room. But before we do that, we got to shout out the homies at Lamb Chops. SGLambchops.com is the website. The promo code is Candlestick20. It gets you 20% off. 20% off of what, Kyle? Well, apparently this is your first time listening to the podcast if you don't know that Lamb Chops is the official clothing brand of Candlestick Chronicles. They have partnered with the Minnesota Timberwolves to make some really sick stuff. For the Timberwolves, some of the players I saw wearing Lamb Chop stuff pregame the other night. Is that why they won Game 4? Some people point to Karl Anthony Towns' three-point shooting. I'm pointing to the pregame Lamb Chops. But that's just me.
I think it's a safe assumption.
Yeah, thanks.
Still alive. They cut out the bad, kept the good.
Nice, dude.
Which is a Lamb Chop slogan on their spring line. But yeah, shout out to our homies at Lamb Chops. I am wearing the sweat shorts as always. Perfect for around the house in the air conditioning. Also perfect for outside. The mesh shorts are coming back in a big way. They've been in the dresser drawer for a little while now, but it's getting hot here in the Central Valley in Sacramento.
Yep.
And these sweat shorts are back in rotation. A lot of compliments, a lot of conversation starting with those. So shout outs to our homies at Lamb Chops, and shout out to the Wolves for keeping it going. And maybe we'll see more Lamb Chops on the walk in for Game 5 in Minnesota.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. I can't wait to wear mine when we go golfing for your birthday. I'll be out there.
It's going to be fun.
For sure.
It's going to be fun.
We're also sponsored by Prize Picks. A big shout out to Asia Wilson of the Las Vegas Aces. I had a 3-player entry on Wednesday. I had less than half a run allowed between the starting pitchers in the Phillies and Giants games. There's Kyle Harrison for the Giants, and I believe a player named Christopher Sanchez for the Phillies. It didn't make it past the first batter of the game because Kyle Schwarber led off the game with a solo homer. But Toronto and Chicago, the White Sox, went scoreless in the first, which I had less than half a run there. And then Asia Wilson, I had more than 11 rebounds. She had 9 going into the fourth quarter, and she did not start the fourth quarter. In a 5-minute stretch, not even 5 minutes, in like a 3-minute stretch in the fourth quarter, she pulled down 6 rebounds. She is one of the best basketball players on the planet right now, and she came through for me. And I had a flex play on, so I got 2 out of 3. So I get a little money back on my entry, which is big time, and one of the reasons I love Prize Picks Daily Fantasy, among the many reasons there are to love it.
Shouts to you for that flex play. Sounds like a good one. Shouts to Prize Picks. Don't have to argue with your friends over your fantasy friends who want to do an auction draft rather than a snake draft. Don't have to worry about a player being gone for the season with an injury early on. You basically have a fresh slate whenever you want one. It's a huge perk to playing Prize Picks. Makes playing daily fantasy a ton of fun. And shout out to them. Promo code Candlestick to match your initial deposit up to $100.
Yep, you said it. PrizePicks.com/Candlestick, promo code Candlestick for a first deposit match up to $100, just like Chris said. That is PrizePicks.com/Candlestick, promo code Candlestick for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, let's talk about Jauan Jennings. Jauan Jennings, Adam Schefter reported on Wednesday, has signed a deal with the 49ers, a contract extension. It's technically a 1-year extension, but he got a free agent tender, so it's like a 2-year. He's under contract for 2 years, but it got announced as a 1-year extension. I don't know how the machinations work. He's with the team through 2025 on a contract worth up to $15.4 million. Again, this is via Adam Schefter. That includes $10.5 million guaranteed. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, so because he didn't sign his tender, it's essentially a new contract, right? So it's it's a new 2-year contract, which is akin to, as Adam Schefter pointed out, a 1-year extension. It basically means Jauan Jennings is under contract this year, next year for the 49ers. at a pretty reasonable number, something averaging $7.5 million, close to, per season, which I think the way we talked about it, what Jauan Jennings is worth maybe on the open market, I think that's about market rate for a really, really good third receiver. I think it's fair to say Jauan is a really good third receiver, right?
Yep.
He does a lot of the things you need a third receiver to do, because he's not going to be a guy who gets 10 targets a game. He's going to be somebody you need on the field and run it for running plays. He's going to be somebody who's going to win on third down for you. He's going to be a red zone target. Jauan is just like a ton. He deserves a ton of credit, frankly. He's a 7th round pick out of Tennessee.
Yep.
I know you know how much he was beloved by Tennessee Volunteer Nation.
Boy, do I.
with all the content you cranked out when the 49ers drafted him in the 7th round. But just like, you look at good teams over time, right? A lot of them have star players, obviously, but there are a lot of really good players on the margins that some of these teams have that keep them in contention for a long time and make big plays in big moments. And they might not produce at the same level week in and week out as the star players. But like the Super Bowl as a prime example, when teams are taking away your stars and you need other guys to step up, Jauan Jennings has proven he can do that. And he's proven he can do that in the biggest moments of the season. Yep. And there's a pretty good chance, had the 49ers won the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, that Jauan Jennings would have at least been a candidate for Super Bowl MVP. So I like the signing. We can talk about what it means for the 49ers receiving core over the long haul. I think, this raises the question, again, what were they doing drafting a receiver, Ricky Pearsall, with the 31st pick in the draft? After bringing back Jennings, presumably while they're in the process of signing Brandon Ayuk to a new contract extension, which is, we're expecting that to happen at some point this offseason. We can talk about that. But on the surface, just looking at Jauan Jennings, 2 years, over $15 million, I think it makes a ton of sense for both sides. I think he's a really good number 3 receiver, and I think he's a really good player on the margins of the roster. And I think those are the types of moves you make if you're a smart front office, and the 49ers have proven to be a pretty smart front office.
Yeah, you get him on the team through his age 28 season. And I think the most notable thing here is this benefits the 49ers for multiple reasons, and that dovetails into kind of the future of their receiver room. So I'll put a pin in that. But I think for Jennings, this gives him an opportunity to maybe produce a little more over the next couple of years, especially into next year, because there's a very real scenario where Jauan Jennings is just wide receiver 2 for the 49ers in 2024, where he could really put up some numbers. And then he's hitting free agency as a 28-year-old going on 29, where he might get a legit kind of wide receiver 2 contract. So I think this really works out for him. It's good for the 49ers because of kind of everything you said up top. There are just so many things they can do because of what he does as a blocker, where even when they go out of 3 receiver sets, they can run pretty effectively out of that. And the Niners, as good as Brandon Ayuk is as a run blocker, the Niners just don't have a player with Jauan Jennings' skill set. Just his size, his tenacity as a blocker, his football guy term, his ability to win at the catch point. And I think I go back to, he had the huge Super Bowl, but then the Green Bay game, he had that huge, like, one-handed catch on the 3rd down conversion where Purdy just floated one to the middle of the field back across his body, and Jennings went up over a defender and hauled it in with one hand. Like, that's just kind of I hate using the term special, but that's just kind of a play that not every third receiver in the league is going to go make. So if you have a player who can block like hell for a team that's going to run it about half the time, and a receiver who the quarterback trusts in 3rd downs and red zone situations, I don't care what his volume looks like. Jauan Jennings is going to be a productive player, and it's at a reasonable price too. So I think this is just all around a good idea for the 49ers. Now, or for Jennings and the 49ers. Now, I think that there's an added value here for San Francisco, where when you start to kind of look at the future of the receiving core, because there's a chance that, like, next season, let's operate real quick under the assumption that they extend Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel is a cap casualty, basically. They either trade him or they have to let him go, whatever it is. So Deebo Samuel's not on the team. The Niners are then looking at Ricky Pearsall in year 2, who may or may not have proven anything in year 1. Jacob Cowing in year 2, same deal. And then having Jauan Jennings on the roster, having a reliable option on the roster, could be a really, really significant thing. So that's the first thing that really jumps out to me when you talk about what Jauan Jennings means to this team, not only this year, but into next year.
If they end up moving on from Deebo Samuel, which it seems like that's where the wind is blowing, right? It seems like the 49ers are going to pay Brandon Ayuk this offseason, say thank you for your services, Deebo Samuel. We're gonna do what the Packers did with Devontae Adams, what the Chiefs did with Tyreek Hill, and they're gonna go get pretty good value potentially if Deebo Samuel has a good season for Deebo in a trade, and hope that his best years are behind him and not in front of him, right? And that's a pretty common trend in the NFL, and I think there's an argument to be made that maybe receivers are being somewhat overvalued given how many really good receivers there are. Yes. Right, because you can replace them, and that's probably a separate podcast. But just overall, if you're looking at, like you said, in 2025, if you're looking at a world where Deebo Samuel's playing for the New York Jets or somewhere else, yeah, Jauan Jennings is a starting receiver at $7.5 million or whatever the structure ends up being. That's potentially a bargain. And you know what? The 49ers are probably going to draft another receiver in the first 3 or 4 rounds of the 2025 draft, if that's a scenario too, right? Like maybe they do the thing where they trade Deebo for a first or second round pick, turn around and use that pick on a receiver to try to find a replacement. That's very possible. But again, separate discussion. The point here is that you give yourself some optionality, to borrow a term that people use when talking about the Golden State Warriors. The 49ers have given themselves a little bit of shout out to our homies at Light Years. And they see my t-shirt. But I was going to say it gives you optionality in terms of the way you can look at your receiving core beyond 2024. Right, because now you don't have to replace 2 guys. Whereas if Jauan Jennings, if he just signed his tender and then left the 49ers in free agency, then you're replacing potentially 2 of your top 3 receivers instead of just 1. If you move on from Deebo Samuel, which again seems like this is where the wind is blowing. So yeah, right. I don't think there's any downside. I really don't think there's any downside. Obviously, the big thing looming over all of this is Brock Purdy's eventual contract, which is going to come next year. And I assume that's been part of the Niners' calculus with basically everything they've done this offseason, is knowing that Brock Purdy is going to be making $45-50 million a year starting in 2025. So, you know, I think it's a good move. Jauan Jennings on a reasonable deal. It's a good move.
Yeah, man. And this doesn't mean anything for Ricky Pearsall. It doesn't mean anything for Brandon Ayuk. It doesn't mean anything for Deebo Samuel. Like, this is just the Niners got a player for really cheap who contributes. Like that's the long and short of it. There's no, I wish we could have a big conversation about like, oh, hey, what does this mean for Brandon Ayuk? Nothing. And it doesn't really mean anything.
The Niners did not gain leverage over Brandon Ayuk because of this Jennings contract.
No. Also, shockingly, 19 catches last year. I know we've talked about this before, but I would have said like 30, maybe 40. I just feel like
he felt like a guy who had like with the impact he has on the team. Yeah, it feels like he had double his catch total.
Yeah,
like 19 catches is nothing.
If every catch, and this is you made the joke that I learned about how popular Jauan Jennings was because of Tennessee Volunteers fans, which I did. Shout out to the Vols. I have an immense respect for that school and those fans. I said every catch is a boxing match with Jauan Jennings. Like every single college highlight is him just and then there's just violence. And they brought that to the NFL and it translated. So it does it every Jauan Jennings catch feels like 3. Because it just
and doesn't it feel like too that he's drawn what, like 3 or 4 or 5 personal fouls against him per season because like defensive players just get frustrated with the way he blocks.
Yeah.
Like he'll hold a block to the whistle and then a defensive player will like smack him in the head and draw a 15-yard penalty and Jennings is just there like clapping. Like that happens a lot and there's
good
value in that.
Yeah. That's why he and Jalen Hurd hated each other. Am I right? Remember that? No? Okay, just me. Okay. I was deep into the University of Tennessee wide receiver room interpersonal dynamics there for a while. It's fine.
Sure. Just the dark web of roster politics and Balls Nation.
Like when they drafted Jalen Hurd was 19 and then Jennings was 20. And I just remember somebody being like, oh, that's never going to work. It's like, what?
Yeah, that tracks.
Can we talk about a different wide receiver thing real quick?
Absolutely.
And Nico Collins getting 3 years and $75 million max with $52 million guaranteed from the Texans. Because I think of all the wide receiver contracts that have gotten signed this offseason, I think that's the one that Jennings people probably too, but Ayuk's people are going to circle and say, this is kind of in the ballpark of what we're looking for. About 24, 25 million a year, but that $52 million guaranteed, that is a shitload of dollars guaranteed. Second most in the league among receivers.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Jeremy Fowler. I'm looking it up right now. I think Jeremy Fowler reported that Brandon Ayuk wanted a Amon-Ra St. Brown type contract, which was...
That's like 4 and 120 with 34.6 guaranteed, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess
28 million a year on average. I mean, I think that's the going rate. I think, look, like these contract numbers always seem bloated when they first come out. And I think Ayuk is absolutely worth 25 million a year plus.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's going to be a thing that happens. So, you know, 20, set, what were the guarantees on that contract you just mentioned?
On Nico Collins?
Yeah.
52 million, not dollars.
I think Brandon Ayuk comes in closer to like 80.
Guaranteed?
80 million. Yeah. Yeah, dude. He's going to get a lot of money.
Wow.
He's going to get a lot of money.
Just for Tyreek Hill has the most guaranteed money of any wide receiver right now, and he's at like 52.25 million. 80 million guaranteed would be I'm talking bananas.
Practical guarantees.
Okay.
Not like what's guaranteed at signing, the number is going to be big, but then you go through and like, yeah, like there's going to be funny money in that, but like I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like the first 2 or 3 years are guaranteed in Brandon Ayuk's contract.
Rob in the chat said the St. Brown contract is weird when you look at the structure. That's why it's vital.
Yeah.
You got to wait for it. Yeah, I don't know if he gets 80 million guaranteed, but that's like the guaranteed number is I think going to be more commensurate with the Nico Collins contract than the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract. That's all.
52 40. Yeah, so okay.
80 million guaranteed for a wide receiver would
maybe I'm thinking too much about other positions and the way those contracts are structured.
Sure.
But I bet he comes in at more than 52 million guaranteed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's probably, like I said, you can look at the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract and go, ooh, 4 for 120, 30 a year. But then when you look, it's not that. it's right in line with the other receivers, kind of in that range in terms of annual value and guaranteed money and all that. So that made my antennas perk up when Collins signed that deal. And Collins was really, really good last year with CJ Stroud. And that's why I think he had I think 1,200 yards last year. It was his first 1,000-yard season, and the Texans locked him up because they want to pair him with a quarterback, their young quarterback that he has a great rapport with. And that to me is why, I'm talking to my buddy Rich at work today, and he was very, very concerned that the 49ers weren't going to extend Brandon Ayuk. And my thought is, one, look at what the Texans did with Nico Collins, and your young quarterback who you are going to invest in has a favorite target who is super productive. You want to keep that guy around. Like that's part of team building. That is a key thing. But then the second thing, if they weren't ready to pay whatever they're going to have to pay to keep him, whether it's $27 million annually or 28 or whatever it is, and whether it's $52 million guaranteed or 55 or whatever it is, they knew that was going to be the kind of going rate when the draft happened. And if all the reporting I saw from Matt Barrows and I believe from Tim Kawakami and maybe Matt Mayoko as well, but definitely Matt Barrows, so I'll credit him for sure, was that the Niners are looking for like an early first-round pick for Brandon Ayuk if they were going to move him. I'm guessing if they had opened it up and been like, yeah, we'll take 30 for Brandon Ayuk, then he would have been traded, and they would have done that if they weren't ready to pay what they're going to need to pay to keep him.
Yeah, I agree.
That's right.
They were only going to trade him if they got an amazing offer.
Yeah.
That's why, like, there was this reaction, and again, we don't have to beat a dead horse here, but there was a reaction to, oh, the 49ers are not saying they will not trade Brandon Ayuk. Their ethos as an organization the entire time has basically been, we'll trade anybody for the right price. So when asked that question, they've said, yeah, we'd trade him for the right price. And if someone wants to give them a very high first-round pick and they can get a receiver in the first round of the draft who could come close to replicating Brandon Ayuk's production on a rookie scale contract and not have to pay Brandon Ayuk $26, $27, $28 million a year going forward, then they would be open to that. But they never got that offer and they didn't trade him.
Yep.
So, that's just, it is what it is. I just think it's going to happen. I think what's really interesting, speaking of Tim Kawakami, he wrote a column at The Athletic talking about Jed York's cash spending. And one of the things the 49ers have done over the years has been give out more guaranteed money and in terms of cash and all the restructures they've done. They've been one of the highest spending teams in the league, despite not having a quarterback on a veteran contract since Jimmy Garoppolo left.
Right.
And that's, like they're going into this season, over the cap says the Niners are third in the NFL in total cash spending in 2024. In 2025, they're down to fifth. But that's before they cash out Brock Purdy and Brandon Ayuk.
Right. Exactly.
So what's interesting is the 49ers are a very rich team. They can basically make anything they want work. The thing is you're guaranteed more flexibility with constructing these contracts when you guarantee more money. Right. So when you guarantee more money up front, that allows you to move cap numbers around and adjust the salary cap in ways that work for you.
Sure.
That's one of the reasons why the 49ers, like, that's what restructures do. It puts money in players' pockets. It gives the team flexibility when it comes to cap spending, at some point, is an owner going to say, man, this is a little too rich for my blood, or am I just going to pay whatever it takes? And it feels like Jed York is the type of owner now, given how much money Levi's Stadium is generating, given how many playoff games the 49ers have hosted and been a part of, and just given how much money the NFL is making as a whole, it seems like Jed York is fine doling that money out. But that's going to be, I would encourage
Super Bowl.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to go read Kawakami's column, because I thought it was a good one. Because it is an interesting side of it where, not every team is willing to spend what it takes to keep guys. And it's not just about cap spending. It's about putting cash up front in these contracts that give you flexibility going forward, and be willing to restructure guys to create more salary cap space. And in doing so, paying even more cash on top of having an extremely well compensated head coach and general manager combination. Right. So, that'll be interesting to see too, because at some point, like, is Jed York going to start playing hardball and be like, yeah, I have all these big contracts. Like, I can only go so far. Or is he just going to be like, screw it, we're doing all we can to win a Super Bowl?
I've heard that they hang Super Bowl banners, not division banners, per source. So
at Levi's Stadium,
that's the goal.
Yeah.
Again, per source.
Not at goal. Not at
winning
Golden
with
One
class,
Center.
etc., etc. Old jokes.
Rob, they hang that thing at Golden One Center.
Rob in the YouTube chat, check out Striking Gold on the Blue Wire Podcast Network as well. He has 2 questions there. One, he asked if we think Brandon Ayuk is worth a $28 million-ish per year contract. To me, it's a easy yes, because if you let Brandon Ayuk walk, and in 2 years Deebo Samuel is either gone or no longer an effective player, you run the risk of rolling out like Danny Gray and Ronnie Bell and Dante Pettis. Like, it was ugly there for a while until the 49ers figured out their receiver room. And I understand the argument that they don't pass it a lot. I think they were last in the league in pass attempts last year, but they were also the most efficient passing offense in the league last year because they have good wide receivers. Like, yes, Kyle Shanahan can make it work with Trent Taylor and Dante Pettis and whoever, but it is a lot easier to make it work when you have elite players in your room already. And if you're going to pay Brock Purdy, I think it makes sense to pay a top-end weapon to pair with him for the long term.
So Deebo Samuel, his contract paid him $71 million, $41 million in guarantees. Like, to me, if you're putting up more production than Deebo Samuel is, and Deebo's on that contract, then you're probably worth that type of money, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Deebo Samuel was at the top of the market when he got his deal, and I think Brandon Ayuk, I don't think he deserves Tyreek Hill money. I don't think he's like, Tyreek Hill was a legit MVP candidate for a large part of last year. I don't think he deserves $30 million a year, but like, I think Brandon Ayuk definitely should be at that 25, 26, $27 million number. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. Yeah. And honestly, I fully believe if he were on a team where he was more of a primary focus, he could be 120 catch, 1,600 yard, 12 touchdown type receiver. I think he's that good. And I think he's made of the right stuff. I think, like, mentally, he's like one of those dudes that like he has whatever it is. I think he has it. I don't think he's, I don't like all the things you hear about Stephon Diggs and, not getting along with coaches and teammates and things like that. Like, I don't think any of that's true with Brandon Ayuk.
No, I don't think so either. I also think there's an aspect of this where you have to project out over the next 2 or 3 years where Deebo Samuel, whether it's next year or the year after, Deebo Samuel is eventually gone. George Kittle is eventually either gone or taking a bigger backseat in the offense. Christian McCaffrey's no longer around. At some point, there's a real possibility that the Niners are like a 3-wide, spread it out and throw it way more than they do now type of offense in the not super distant future. And in that scenario where Brandon Ayuk is getting 150 plus targets a year, I think that's one where you'd be very, very happy to have him in the building, and you'll be cool with him putting up 1,300 yards and 8 or 9 touchdowns in the meantime.
Yeah. Rob asked another one.
Rob, you should have just been on the fucking pod.
Rob asked another one. Here's a fun question. Why did so many teams beat the 49ers to the punch on receiver extension? Seems like they're often behind the curve in that regard.
Great question.
So I kind of think, like if you're Brandon Ayuk, why would you sign a contract early? Like if you're Brandon Ayuk, you can wait till training camp. Like there's no rush to get a deal done. Like unless you're really dying to be at OTAs, which I don't think any veteran players are.
Go check out our
So I
Fred
would
Warner
say,
interview for veterans' thoughts on OTAs.
yeah, that's true. We had Fred Warner on the podcast last week. You guys should definitely check
In
that out
case
if
you
you
missed
haven't.
it.
But I think like if you're Brandon Ayuk, wouldn't you want to know where you stack up against these other guys instead of signing a deal and then watching someone who you think you're better than get a bigger contract and then you're like, damn, I didn't really maximize that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I don't think Brandon Ayuk should get or will get Justin Jefferson type money because I think Jefferson's going to be the biggest receiver contract. Maybe CeeDee Lamb. I don't know. I think you could. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's production I think is notably higher than Brandon Ayuk's. But again, I think if Brandon Ayuk were in that offense, I think the production would be very similar.
I agree.
Because the Cowboys lack the other weapons that the 49ers have.
Yep.
But if I'm Brandon Ayuk, I would rather have more templates out because these receiver contracts are just going to keep growing as time goes. Like that's how it goes in the NFL. The cap is always going up. The longer you wait to get paid, the more you're going to get paid. So obviously that like you don't want to wait into the season and stuff like that. But like if you're Brandon Ayuk, there's no way you have to look at it like I need to get a deal done now. Whereas, like, no, let's see what CeeDee Lamb gets. Let's see what Justin Jefferson gets. And then if they push the market even higher, then maybe I could say, yeah, I'm as good as these dudes. Give me that kind of contract.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if the 49ers are offering Brandon Ayuk a contract on May 29th that he is ready and willing to sign, it probably means they're paying more than they need to pay. And I get that there's some people who might be like, good. And I'm with you. Players should get every cent they can get. But the 49ers have not ever done business like that. So I don't. I don't know.
Yeah. Anytime John Lynch talks about contracts, he always says deadline spur action.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the 49ers history of signing their contracts, all these guys get signed right around the start of training camp or during training camp, with Nick Bosa being the exception, signing a week before the season started, because that was a really big, complicated contract. Maybe Brandon Ayuk's happens that long, but like when there are reports in the spring that the two sides are not close to a deal, to me, it's just kind of like, yeah, duh. Like training camp is still 3 months. Right. Training camp is still 3 months away. Like if training camp isn't close, so why should I think that they would be close on a contract now?
Yeah,
because they've always been sort of a deadline Spurs action type team, and John Lynch has admitted it. So I think, I'm expecting this to get done sometime in July. Obviously, that's not 3 months from now, but I think July, maybe early August. I don't think this is going to be what happened with Nick Bosa. I would equate it to what happened with Fred Warner and George Kittle. Like these are all complicated, big contracts. This is life-changing money for him. He's probably never. I mean, maybe because of the position he plays, maybe he signs another big deal after this. But for a lot of these guys, their first veteran contract is the best bite of the apple they're ever going to get when it comes to making life-changing money. Like these guys, these guys are going to live lives long beyond football. So, they need money for like the next 30 or 40 years, not just, the immediacy of their playing career. So I will never begrudge a player for, trying to get everything they're worth. And in Brandon Ayuk's case, the reason I would guess the reason why he hasn't signed yet or why the two sides aren't close is because training camp's not all that close right now.
Yep. That's it. That's what I got. I think Brandon Ayuk will sign a deal close to camp. And I think where I land.
Do we over analyze the draft? Like, is it?
Yes.
When it comes to the Ricky Pearsall thing, could it be as simple as, oh, Kyle Shanahan really likes this guy. they're probably going to need to add another receiver at some point. Maybe they'll just take this dude now. And maybe it's not so much like, oh, well, they drafted Ricky Pearsall, so that means the Brandon Ayuk contract might not get done, and maybe they trade Ayuk. Like, my feeling is that we're overanalyzing it, and it might just be like, yeah, we're probably going to need a receiver at some point over the next couple of years. We really like this dude. Let's just take him now and get him in the mix sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
and we don't
that's
like,
100%
and
what
we
I
don't
think
like,
it is.
and we don't like any of these tackles all that much.
Yeah, I think that's 100% what it was. Yeah, Ricky Pearsall is way up there on our board, and this is a position we may or may not need in the next couple of years, so let's just get a good player in the building.
But before we go, I did want to mention this. Chris Forrester, Niners offensive line coach, spoke to the media today. An illuminating and very caffeinated session, at least it seemed like.
Yeah, but enough about the podcast.
But he was asked by our good buddy Nick Wagner, shout out to our favorite cast member, about sort of the value of highly drafted offensive linemen, and sort of leading to, the idea that the 49ers decided against drafting an offensive lineman early on, or at least in the first 2 rounds, and going instead for, pass catcher, cornerback. And what Chris Forrester said, the offensive line coach said, which I thought was fascinating, was, man, if it's me, I would rather have guys that touch the ball. Like, if I'm investing premium capital, I want those investments to be with guys who touch the football. And he said, you can throw a bubble screen to Deebo Samuel, and the difference is Deebo Samuel's an elite player, and he can go score a touchdown without needing anything from a right tackle. Right? The right tackle could have perfect form, or it could be a perfect rep from a right tackle, but it might not matter because the ball came out so quickly.
Yep.
Which sort of reinforces everything that I think we already thought we knew about Kyle Shanahan's ethos when it came to, premium investment in offense. Like, obviously Trent Williams is an outlier, an all-time outlier, game changer, a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and if you know for sure that a guy, or if you're certain a guy you're going to draft is going to be Trent Williams on the offensive line, then fine.
Yeah. But the most interesting thing that Forrester said was, he's like, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of, like, there's not really a difference between an offensive lineman that you draft with the 34th pick or the 54th pick. Like, and he would much rather put a premium on guys who, touch the football.
How much shock they have in their hands.
So I just thought that was
how much
interesting
sand
and
they have in
illuminating.
their ass.
It's still the wildest thing you've ever said on the podcast.
It was insane. It was totally insane. No, that's super. No, that is interesting, because I would have assumed that every position coach is like, no, we need to draft offensive linemen first because they're in the trenches and need to win in the trenches and da-da-da-da-da. But you go look at the Niners' investments have been at left tackle. They're big investments. And to a lesser extent, center. But then they didn't pay Mike McGlinchey. They're going to figure out at right tackle, and they'll figure it out at the 2 guard spots. And they'll just keep throwing bodies at the problem and hope that somebody develops into a starter.
The counterpoint, obviously, is like, well, what about when you go against Chris Jones in the Super Bowl?
Sure.
That's the counter. And it would be hard for him. It would be hard for Chris Forrester to have a good retort against that. But maybe that probably goes back to the fact that Kyle Shanahan had his lunch taken in the Super Bowl, basically on every 3rd down in the 4th quarter and overtime, by Steve Spagnuolo.
Yep.
So, yeah, maybe it's just Kyle Shanahan needs to be better, and the 49ers will
maybe Brock Purdy needs to be better.
Oh, wow.
This comes down to quarterback play, and if he can't get it done this year, why are they extending him? I'm joking. That's a joke. The Jauan Jennings one-handed catch, by the way, I conflated that with a different play against the Packers. The one-handed one was against the Lions.
In a bigger game.
Right. Point stands. Just wanted to correct my wrongness this time.
He did have a big catch. I think it was a 3rd down over the middle. It was one of those ones where Purdy fitted over a linebacker. Called
Mhm.
it layering the football,
Yeah.
to borrow a football guy term.
Just layer it in there.
I had another you mentioned Jauan Jennings, his strength at the catch point as a football guy term.
Yep, thank you.
Jennings just does a really good job of cutting outside of his frame.
Yo, big time. Creating separation. Good in a phone booth. Yeah, cutting outside of his frame is a really, really good one. Dante Pettis, really good at that. Okay, that's all I have to say. Yeah, scored a big touchdown against the Niners in week 1 a couple years ago, FYI. Okay. I'm going to go now.
Great. Likewise. Good to see everybody.
Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your pods. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@Candlestick Chronicles podcast, or just search Candlestick Chronicles on YouTube and we come up there. We're doing more video stuff. Shout out to you, Chris, for making that happen. So I got a ton more content coming up there as well. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back next time.